make your own opportunities, put yourself out there, take responsibility, decide where you want to get to and make steps to get there.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Sharon Sutton.
My Island Influencer this week, Catriona Mackie, boasts an extraordinary professional and personal life story so compelling that it spans 4 remarkable pages on her CV. Hailing from the south of Glasgow, Catriona is a passionate social historian interested in material culture and its reflection on the socio-cultural, economic and political context in which it evolves. We delve into her story from discovering and learning Scottish Gaelic to experiencing life on the Isle of Skye before moving to the Isle of Man in 2008. She shares her insights into her role as a young academic responsible for establishing a master's degree in Manx studies and how she, as a confessed introvert, evolved into a lecturer. Catriona's unique blend of architectural fascination and language skills takes centre stage, as does her latest project, a collaboration with colleagues at Oxford Brookes University, investigating women's experiences in Manx politics. Over the past decade, Catriona has been deeply involved with the Manx national heritage and culture of Man, whilst currently teaching heritage studies, Celtic studies, and Manx history and culture at UCM. I'm sure you'll find Catriona's extraordinary story as captivating as I do. So allow me to present Catriona Mackie in episode 102 of Island Influencers.
So welcome, Catriona Mackie, today to Island Influencers podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today on the project, becoming an Island Influencer. Well, you're already an Island Influencer, but telling us all about your story and how we're having this conversation today. We're sitting here on a beautiful sunny day in October. So just to give this a timestamp. Yeah,
it's absolutely gorgeous, and I have a real interest in old buildings, and we're sitting in a very old building now, and I'm looking up at the beams across the roof, thinking This is just beautiful.
Oh, thank you. It's not always quite so tranquil. If you can imagine a storm blowing through the single glazed sash windows on a Storm Force 10 day. It kind of
not quite so nice.
It's remarkably quiet on such days, but it does get a bit chilly. Anyway, that's an aside. For the benefit of our listeners, would you tell us all about your journey and how we're having this conversation today?
Okay, so I'm not from the Isle of Man. You can probably tell from my accent.
Yeah, just a bit.
I was born and brought up in Glasgow, well, just south of Glasgow, a little town called Cambuslang. Went to school in Glasgow, left school at 17 with a reasonable set of qualifications.
Yeah, it was like Scottish Highers.
Scottish Highers and 1 A-level in maths, because I was quite good at maths, quite enjoyed it.
Well, they are.
And at the time, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but my parents, I come from quite a sort of upper middle class family. My mum was a doctor, my dad was a lawyer, and they were very keen that I sort of go straight to university, and also that the degree that I study was one that would lead to a job at the end of it.
Yeah.
So, and I had no interest in medicine or law, really, not at 17. But I was quite good at maths, and I wasn't too bad at drawing, and so somebody said, what about architecture? And I thought, well,
it's a great gift, isn't it, to be gifted at maths and at art?
I suppose. I don't know that gifted's quite the right word, but
it's left and right brain.
I suppose it is, yeah, that's a good point. So anyway, I kind of fell into a degree in architecture at the University of Strathclyde. Met some lovely people there, but didn't really enjoy it, I have to say. I wasn't particularly good at it. But I was very lucky in that I was the sort of last year that got full funding to go to university. And I could, I think, have opted to switch degrees after my first year. But I was quite stubborn, and I thought, I've kind of committed to this, so I'm gonna work through it, plough my way through it, and do as best I can.
Yeah.
So I kind of did that, and again kind of decided that, I'm studying architecture, I'm going to be an architect, and therefore I want to give myself the best chance possible. So I spent my summer holidays kind of working in architects' offices as well to kind of build up that experience, which really worked well for me.
Be quite different back then, I guess, not with no CAD, computer-aided design, or everything done by hand.
Funnily enough, CAD was just starting to come in, and actually funnily enough, through the work that I did over the summer and the job that I finally got when I graduated, I kind of felt that actually the tuition that we got at university didn't really prepare us for working as architects. I learned so much more on the job than I had done at university. But having that kind of experience of working during the summer in the industry really helped. So I was the first person in my year to get a job on graduating, even though I ended up with a third-class degree. That wasn't very good. But I kind of, again, that idea that this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to persevere.
Yeah.
But didn't enjoy it. And so I spent a year working as an architectural assistant in Glasgow, and found it quite soul-destroying, to be honest.
Why was that?
Because you had sort of developers coming to you and saying, we've got this plot of land and we want you to put 250 flats on it, and we don't really care how you do it. And so everything was kind of minimum standard, minimum size, minimum everything. And I just thought, I wouldn't want to live in one of these places. And yeah, it just didn't. And to be completely honest, I wasn't very good at design. And I kind of eventually accepted that and thought, okay, this is just not for me. And, to qualify as an architect, it's a 7-year minimum.
Well, I see from your, I've never had a CV that went to 4 pages before.
Oh.
Some remarkable achievements on here. And yeah, I can see. So you did the BSc honours degree, which took 4 years, and then you did another 5, part 1 of the RIBA. And yes, 7 years. It's a long time. Yeah, and I really couldn't face going back to university to do the sort of next part of the qualification. And at that point I thought, okay, I need to find something else. And the thing that I had been really interested in at school, bizarrely, was Scottish Gaelic. I kind of stumbled on it through music, sort of listening to the radio and hearing a song by a Scottish band called Runrig, who became very, very famous. Yes, I've heard of them. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh, that's an interesting language. And I remember, so I must have been about 12 or 13, something like that. And I remember talking to my dad and saying, what is this language? Where do they speak this language? And he said, oh, here, in Scotland. And I thought, what? There's another language that's spoken in Scotland. Did your mum and dad speak it, or did they have any knowledge of it? No, not at all. Gosh. No. It's more, I guess, the Highlands that it's at that time. Yes, I would say not so much nowadays. It's much more visible now, but certainly back in the 80s, it would have been. Yeah. So were you into music at the same time? Yeah, I was very much into music. Yeah, all sorts, folk music. Your standard teenage stuff as well. Yeah. Did you play? Well, latterly, yes. So I took up the accordion on my 21st birthday. Oh, that was my present from my parents. Very sad, I know, but I loved it. I loved piano or button. Piano. Yeah. I loved dancing. I loved sort of Cayley dancing. I did a lot of that, and I loved the music. I loved playing, and yeah, really, I kind of. Really enjoyed it, and have to confess I haven't played much for the last 20 odd years. Yeah. Again, sort of work stresses. Yeah. No, that's okay. It's I understand. But yeah, music and language, and so I kind of wanted to learn more about it. And actually, when I was at school, I stayed on for a 6th year of secondary school, which I didn't have to do. I had an English teacher, Ronnie Renton, who was a Gaelic speaker. And he said, if you stay on for another year, I'll teach you for an O-level, which was the GCSE equivalent. Yeah. And so I did that with him, and he then encouraged me to go to summer school up in the Isle of Skye at Solmarostig. And I did that for kind of 3 years running, so I'd kind of kept up this interest. And when I finally realised that architecture wasn't for me, I thought, I finally want to pursue something that I'm really interested in. How did Mum and Dad take that at the time? Not brilliantly, I have to say. Not brilliantly. They were very good about it and very supportive, but at the same time, I think they thought I should be doing something better with my life. Oh. My dad's very interested in it. He's sort of, very interested in Gaelic culture. He started learning a little bit recently as well, which is nice. So I spent 2 years up there in the Isle of Skye learning Gaelic and other
sort of Highland history and culture and sort of history of the North Atlantic Rim as well.
Yeah. So you got a diploma out of that?
Got a diploma out of that, really, really good. And then moved down to Edinburgh to do postgraduate studies in the Celtic Studies department.
Yeah. Did your masters?
Masters and then PhD, and rather bizarrely managed to combine my educational, my very diverse educational background, and sort of looked at the built environment in the Scottish Highlands, because I kind of,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, the stuff about architecture that really interested me wasn't something that we'd covered at university or in practice, to be fair, and that was really the kind of the way in which people engage with their built environment and how the built environment shapes us and shapes our actions and our activities, and how we shape our built environment based on our, current social, economic, cultural circumstances.
Doesn't that make more sense?
Yeah. So I kind of, when I got to Edinburgh and I thought, actually, I'm quite interested in this, I sort of went to the library and went to the architecture shelves and thought, somebody must have written stuff about this, the human element of architecture. And I did eventually find some stuff, but it was kind of quite diverse. Some of it was in sort of anthropology, and some of it was in psychology, and some of it was in kind of cultural geography or historical archaeology, and not so much in the pure architecture. But I kind of read voraciously about all of that and set a path for myself that I was going to look at. The Isle of Lewis has a lot of standing ruined buildings from sort of dating from probably the late 18th century to the present, and I thought, let's have a look at how these buildings have changed over time, and what that can tell us about how people were living and how their ways of living changed over time, how their kind of again, their social, economic and cultural circumstances changed the way in which they built their houses, because they were, whereas I guess what we traditionally think of as architecture is designed by architects, and yes, we have some flexibility to mould them, the buildings that we live and work in, to an extent, but we have very little say normally over how they're designed, whereas when you look at vernacular architecture, it tends to be built by the people who live in them, and so it is built in the best way for their current circumstances. And if we look at how that vernacular built environment changes over time, we can see that tells us something about how their circumstances have changed over time. Yeah. So I was very interested in that. Spent some time in the Isle of Lewis and kind of looking at buildings, surveying buildings, and talking to people about way of life, and doing a lot of documentary research.
So that's what the PhD was about? That's what the PhD was about,
yeah.
Well, they obviously agreed with the value of it, because you won this award, didn't you?
Oh, yes, I did. It won an award for the Michaela Jennis Ratcliffe Prize for Folk Life that year. Yeah.
It's amazing.
It was a nice feeling. It was a nice feeling to have completed it.
But how amazing to bring your learning together in that way.
It was nobody was more surprised than me, I have to say. But I do. I mean, I think even ever since then, I have diverse interests, and I find it very difficult to define myself. I don't like to have to kind of put myself in a box and say, oh, I'm a medievalist or a Celticist or an anthropologist or an archaeologist or whatever. And I've kind of found myself having to fit into boxes throughout my academic career, and really, I find that quite challenging. I don't really feel the need to have to define myself in a particular way.
I completely get it. I think that's. I think a lot of women listening to this podcast will certainly identify with so much of what you said just then. Yeah. What's defined by?
Yeah, it is by whatever, men. by men, by academic disciplines, by the structures that are in place in society.
Yeah.
And I think I'm interested in ways of living, and that includes language and culture and folklore and the built environment and all that and it doesn't matter whether it's in the in prehistory or today. I'm just I'm interested in that.
That's a wonderful way to be able to bring what you've done to some proper purpose that means things to people. It explains a lot. That's really wonderful. Thank you. So when you moved on to working, you've had to, I guess, do a fair bit of working along the way with your studies. So you did some lecturing at Edinburgh University. Mm-hmm. I see.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I mean, it's kind of expected if you do, certainly if you do a PhD as a student, that you kind of get some lecturing experience along the way. And I was very lucky to be able to do that.
How did you find that?
Oh, thrown in at the deep end.
Yeah.
Very, very challenging, but ultimately very, very rewarding.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, so I taught sort of Gaelic language and literature, and some of the students that I taught have now gone on to do really good, fascinating, interesting things in the Gaelic world. And that's, not because of me, but it's quite
It sounds
rewarding. Yeah,
Definitely.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that. So so I did that. I had another part-time job as well to kind of keep the money coming in. And then when I finished the PhD, a job came up in Edinburgh at the university, working on a corpus of Scottish Gaelic.
What's that?
So it was part of a bigger project to establish a historical dictionary of Scottish Gaelic. It's kind of there has been one for the Irish language for many years, and it was seen as something which we really needed in the language in order to help kind of the language move forward and progress.
Like a body of knowledge.
Yeah, body of knowledge essentially, for which we could use for creating new words, but also just a greater understanding of our past and how language develops. And I was very lucky to be involved in that first part of the project, and essentially it involved me kind of studying about 320 Gaelic texts from the medieval period right through to the present day, and evaluating their use for Gaelic corpus. And I loved it, absolutely loved it.
What was the best thing you learnt from that?
Oh gosh, now you're putting me on the spot. I think the sheer variety of the language and the beauty of it and the things that you can express through it, and the fact that it's just as diverse as any other language.
Have you got any example?
None that I could refer to in a public podcast. I'll tell you later.
Right, okay, I'll put it in the show notes, like, ladies and gentlemen, so you don't have to miss out on that bit. Okay,
but yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I got a little bit of I started to get a little bit of training in lexicography and kind of how to create historical dictionaries, which was great. And I really quite enjoyed that. But I remember being told by my boss at the time, "Oh, you've got a good eye and a good mindset for doing lexicography," and I kind of thought, oh, do I really want to be the kind of person that might make a good lexicographer? I'm not sure. Yeah. But yeah, that sort of attention to detail and kind of
smashing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you moved on to the University of Liverpool.
Yeah. Again, I've been quite lucky in life, and the opportunities have kind of appeared when I needed them.
Yeah.
And that was one. So my contract at the dictionary was coming to an end. I would have loved to stay on, but there wasn't at that point an opportunity to do so. And an opportunity came up at the University of Liverpool, and it was for a lecturer in Manx studies based in Douglas at the Centre for Manx Studies. And I thought, wow, okay, it's worth a shot. So I put together a CV and tried to highlight my kind of diverse sort of Celtic studies background, and applied for the job. And I was interviewed over here in Douglas and interviewed back in Liverpool, and they offered me the job. It was quite remarkable, really. So I moved over here in October of 2008.
Yep.
And I had some remarkable experiences, really, for a very young academic to be able to kind of to be made responsible for setting up a master's degree in Manx studies. Yeah. It's an opportunity that most young academics just wouldn't have. Got to really integrate into the kind of academic community on the Isle of Man and the general community on the Isle of Man.
Fabulous.
I very early on, I was approached by the president of the Antiquarian Society on the island, said, "Oh, do you want to come along, be a member of the committee?" And it was nice. Met some fantastic people that I'm still, friends with today. So that was great, and it was short-lived to an extent. For various different reasons, the University of Liverpool decided that it was going to pull its staff back to Liverpool.
Right.
By that time, I was quite settled here. My husband, who'd moved over in 2011, he was very settled here. In fact, he used to work in Liverpool at John Moores University, and he sort of said, "Well, if you're having to go back and work in Liverpool, cheerio, I'm staying here." So
was he working here at the time?
He was retired.
Oh,
so
my.
He'd worked for 30 years in Liverpool and did not want to go back.
No, fair enough.
He was very settled here at the time.
Wow.
So I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to look for work on the island. And again, luckily, an opportunity to come up at what was then the Isle of Man College of Further and Higher Education. And yet again, had a fantastic opportunity to establish an undergraduate degree. And I was given a lot of flexibility in that in terms of what I wanted to do.
Well, who better qualified?
Well, that I suppose I have a rare breadth of knowledge, if not depth of knowledge. So ultimately, what I ended up deciding on was history and heritage as a degree. And I'm very pleased with that. I'm quite proud of that, really, because I think at the time, you could only study history and heritage together at postgraduate level in the UK, whereas now there are a number of universities who are offering that as undergraduate degrees.
Okay.
And kind of starting to see the benefit of integrating those two.
So leading the way.
Yeah, in a way.
Joining things up.
Joining things up, I think.
You've got a history of doing that.
And if you, maybe, yeah. If you think about it, when we look at heritage, what we're looking at really are the things from our past that we value today. And so it gives us a different perspective on the past and how the past impacts on us today and what we think of as important and why. Yeah. And the kind of the political and cultural institutions that kind of shape those views.
Yeah.
So it's good, and I think students find it interesting and challenging as well. Yeah.
So I know you still do that. So the reason for our conversation today was about the work that you're doing with the part of the work around the political background of women through history in the Isle of Man, and I wondered if you wanted to speak about that and the sort of things you discovered, because talking about the past, reflecting on the future.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a very it's a project in which we're very much looking at the present, but also at the past. So we kind of so I'm working with colleagues from Oxford Brookes University, Professor Peter Edge, who's well known on the island, and his colleague Dr. Alex Powell. And we kind of, after, back in 2016, Lord Lisvane was asked to report on the functioning of Tynwald, and he produced a report. And at that time, this was sort of the summer of 2016, there were only 2 women MHKs.
I remember, yes.
And 1 woman MLC.
Yes.
And, he identified in his report that this was a significant lack of diversity, and we came very low down the kind of worldwide scales of representation, diversity, in government,
in the developed world, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and yet, shortly after that, in 2016, you have 5 women elected to the Keys. 2018, you have 8 people standing for Legislative Council. 5 of them are women, and all 5 women are elected, appointed. And we thought, well, this is really interesting. What's kind of going on here? And we applied for funding just before the 2021 election from Culture Van, and Culture Van were very gracious to award us funding to do part of the research. And essentially what we wanted to do was to look historically at the representation and experiences of women in Tynwald. So for example, between 1919, when women could be elected to the House of Keys, and 2003, only 10 women had served as members of the House of Keys. And in the...
Sorry, if we just... If I'm right, the Isle of Man allowed women the vote before the UK.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
so when did 1881? So it took till 1903 to be eligible to be elected. Did you say
1919?
1919, after the First World War.
First World War. Oh. Yeah. So we we gave sort of women, some women, not all women of property, of a certain amount of property, could vote from 1881. So the first nation in the world to do that, which is really quite forward thinking. But they couldn't be elected to the Keys until 1919, and it actually wasn't until 10 years later that the first woman did decide to stand.
And who was that?
That was Louisa Nelson, and hers is quite an interesting story that I still need to do a little bit more digging into her life. But again, I think she stood because she didn't like what was on offer at the time, and kind of thought, I'm just going to do this. And
what a girl!
Yeah, but yes, it was 1933 before we see the first woman elected, Marion Shimon, and it was kind of. I was almost going to say off the coattails of her husband, and that's not. I don't think that's true. I think she was a very strong woman in her own right. But her husband, Christopher Shimon, was a well-known Manx character, member of the Manx Labour Party, as was she, and he had held his seat in Peel, I think, since 1919, and he died in post in 1933. And she stood in his constituency in Peel, unopposed, and was elected in that by-election, and then elected the following year at the general election.
Okay.
So she was kind of the trailblazer for women in Manx politics.
Yes.
And, you know, throughout the rest of the 20th century, there were periods, I think there was one very short period where there were 4 women in Tynwald, but mostly it was 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Until we get to, so sort of from 2003 onwards, there have been 13, which is still quite a small number when you think about it.
It is, actually, yeah. Any other notable trailblazers within that time?
Well, I think probably more recently you have women like Claire Christian, who really became a trailblazer in the Legislative Council.
She became first
president,
yeah,
in 2011.
Yeah.
And Hazel Hannon, I think, is the other one I would single out. I think she's done some amazing work for supporting Manx culture and minority rights.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
You know, in very difficult circumstances. So yeah, I think that too. So yeah, so we're kind of as part of the project, we were kind of looking at what. Historically, what has been the situation in terms of numbers of women standing, numbers of women being elected, but also looking at the sort of documentary evidence. What were they saying in their manifestos about why they were standing, and what kind of feedback were they getting, what kind of press were they getting, and then sort of looking at the modern period, sort of the last 20, 25 years, and actually interviewing some women politicians about their experiences. Their experiences in what made them decide to stand, their experiences on the campaign trail, their experiences once they were elected.
Yes.
And also...
Is that positive and negative, I presume?
Positive and negative, absolutely. And some very sort of varied experiences across the boards. I think we've interviewed, I want to say 11 women in total.
Yeah.
And we've held a couple of focus groups as well. One for family members of women politicians, you know, sort of what were their perspectives of having a mother or a sister or, you know, whatever, a sibling in Parliament, and also importantly, women who had seriously considered standing and ultimately decided not to, and there were quite a lot of them out there.
I think probably most women, I would think. Yeah.
And sort of what was it that kind of drove them to consider standing, and ultimately, well, why did they decide not to? Because, you know, we want to really look at what are some of the barriers, what are some of the things that are holding women back, and how can we break some of those down and encourage more women to come forward and stand for election.
And what are the top 3 things? The
sort of barriers. I think it varies. Again, you know, we've talked to women who've, you know, been in the Keys, you know, from the 1980s right through to the present day, and we do see a bit of a distinction in experiences, but you know, a lot of women have talked about the money, the amount that it costs to sort of mount an election campaign, and the time.
Which is where I guess a political party would help.
Well, yes, and you know, that is something we've looked at, because we do think that by studying this on the Isle of Man, we do have an important contribution to make to the kind of wider debate about women in politics in small democracies and island democracies, and in a democracy that doesn't have a party political system, which is quite unusual. Yeah. And you know, you could say that absolutely. Not having a party political system means we cannot use that as a method to encourage more women to stand. You know, in Ireland, for example, there's a quota you have to have. I think it's 50% of your candidates have to be women or something like that, in order for you to receive certain funding.
Yeah.
We can't do that over here. On the other hand, you know, if you do have a party political system, so if you want to stand for election in the UK, it's a very lengthy process. You know, you have to an extent, become involved with the party at grassroots level. You have to work your way up. You have to be selected as a candidate.
Yeah, quite a lot of experience built in there before you press the button. Yeah.
Yeah, which you know, has its positives. Whereas on the Isle of Man, you know, we spoke to some women who decided, you know, 5 weeks before the election, though, I'm just going to stand for election.
Wow.
And they could do that.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is a lot more freedom in some respects.
Yes, but the financial barrier is a point that's well made, yeah.
Exactly, and the kind of general support that's available to you, particularly when campaigning. That, you know, even if you are a member of a political party on the island, there's more limited support available to you than there would be in a UK situation. Partly because of the nature of Isle of Man politics. It can be quite personal. So if you're campaigning on the Isle of Man, you're expected to knock on everyone's door yourself. Whereas in the UK, there would be a team of people out campaigning for you with the recognition that there's no way that one candidate could possibly get round everybody. Whereas here, that's kind of expected of you.
Is it?
Yeah, in a lot of constituencies. Less so in maybe some of the urban constituencies, but certainly elsewhere.
Yeah, sure.
People on the door want to speak to you. And I think most candidates want to do that as well. You know, we had a lot of very positive experiences of women on the campaign trail saying, you know, that's where we get to know our constituents and they get to know us, and it's a really positive experience. But there was also that sense of...
I can see that in a more of a rural setting, for sure.
Yeah. That it does take a lot of time, and if you're working a full-time job already, it can be quite challenging. But also there's a kind of a vulnerability there that women candidates can feel that is not matched by their male counterparts. So if you're, you know, on your own knocking on someone's door, you're invited into the house. I think, you know, we heard from some women who kind of felt, you know, not that they were in a bad situation, but aware of their vulnerability in that situation.
Yeah, sure.
If you know, even in an urban environment, if you go into a block of flats and that door shuts behind you, nobody knows where you are. You know, you could be in
kind of a pretty good tracker.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you know, some women made a point of kind of making sure somebody knew where they were going and that kind of thing. Yeah,
shouldn't need to though, should you? I mean, I was going to ask you that about you know, the general attitude of the public, misogyny. Social media that's mostly vitriolic and anonymous if it's allowed to get out of hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, there is a feeling against some of the women who decided not to stand that, you know, why would I put myself and my family through that? And you know, not just for them, but for their if their children were of an age where it would impact upon them, then why would they put their kids through that?
Completely understand.
Yeah. And you know, to an extent that will affect male politicians as well. And you know, I have to say, the kind of caveat is that we haven't looked at the experiences of male politicians.
No, I mean, it's a point well made. I get that, but
but there, I think, you know, from the work we have done, there's a
fair bit of imbalance before you have to do that one, I think.
There is already, and even just that, as I said, that kind of perception of vulnerability, that, you know, maybe talking to family members who say, you know, well, I don't want you going out leafleting at night. Or if the election is in the winter time and most of your campaigning is at night and it's dark.
And it is, isn't it? I think traditionally the election was in November. Has it maybe moved to September now?
Yeah.
It's far more sensible.
It is. Yeah. So, you know, little things like that. And I think, you know, certainly in some of the women we spoke to who were in post in earlier years, and to a certain extent not that long ago, you know, there were comments like, you know, but you've got young children, how can you do this job? Or or you know, my representative's always been a man, so, you know,
yes, I'm going to root for him,
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes.
But obviously there's a variety of experiences and a variety of opinions being expressed as well.
Yeah. Okay. And have you found a positive willingness to change from the people that you've spoken to and canvassed? Or?
I think so, and also I think generally with the election of 5 MHKs and 5 women in 2016 and 5 more, or 10 in total in 2021, you've got that kind of critical mass almost.
Yeah, sure.
At which point it becomes more normalised. So you don't. I think in the era of kind of Claire Christian and Hazel Hannon, there was perhaps a perception that you had to be an exceptional woman to be a woman MHK.
Yes,
which they both were. Yeah. Whereas now, I think it's probably more conceivable for women to see themselves as ordinary women in those roles, in the same way as ordinary men might feel that they could take on those roles. Yeah. So yes, definitely that, and I think that critical mass is going to be hugely helpful, and also just that kind of level of support within Tynwald, that there are other women who will be having similar experiences to you that you can talk to about that.
Yeah, I guess the sort of,
is also,
the
I
empathy.
think, helpful. The empathy, generally.
Yeah, so we're in October 2023. The next election is
2026.
Okay. So is there, are you aware of building towards that, and
not
any specific, are you aware of any specific activity around that for?
Not at the moment. So one of the things that we're hoping to do is to produce a report for Tynwald that has some recommendations in it.
Okay.
Based on some of the information we've gathered. And we don't have that in detail yet.
Right.
But certain things that you could do to make this more conceivable, make it more achievable. I mean, and we have, just very recently seen some changes whereby the standing orders of Tynwald were kind of revised in terms of the sort of sitting times and the holiday times. And, you have this very, very interesting debate between sort of the likes of Laurie Hooper, a male MHK, saying, we ought not to be sitting during half-term weeks, or, we ought to be, we should be more, not so much accommodating, but we ought to be aware that we can change these things to better suit the membership.
Yeah, modernising.
Yeah. Whereas we have some women, like Julie Edge, saying, if you don't like the timings of the sittings, you shouldn't become an MHK. You shouldn't stand for election.
Okay.
So, there's a variety of opinions in there. And I think we're, in the work that we've done, we've tried to capture those variety of opinions rather than overgeneralising.
Yeah, sure. You have to be very conscious of being unbiased.
Absolutely unbiased. And all of those experiences are completely valid.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. So we have seen some changes, and there was a recognition in that report that having the sitting times the way they were would potentially have put off women with young children from standing for election, and that it's a simple, easy change to make that makes the situation a bit more equitable. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah. That sounds sensible to me, but hey, I'm not an MHK.
Yeah, and it's and
nor do I want to be one, just for the record. Okay, well, I mean that's really fascinating. Thanks so much for bringing us up to date where that project is, and well done for taking it on. It's it's been absolutely fascinating. And if you want to find out more, there have been a few. We've given a few lectures over the last year or so that are available online. So if you look up the Google Women in Manx Politics, you'll find some information there about the project. That's great. We'll put those in the show notes. But I mean, I wonder if I may just revert to your day job and the social studies that you are doing currently at University College Man. And I mean, paying sort of further store to the date stamp of this, recorded just after the political upheaval and dreadful atrocities in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel. And just we talked a bit about before the podcast. I wondered if you just mind explaining that these sort of studies have been. It's a complicated story, not that
Absolutely.
There's excuse for murder and
but it's
ever. But it's I wonder if you could.
I think we live in a society where it's even more important to have that nuanced understanding of events than ever before.
Yeah.
And to develop the kind of critical thinking skills that we need to navigate all of the information that is out there. Particularly this last weekend, we've seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation being circulated. And I think, so the degree that I run is in history and heritage. And I think probably humanities as a whole, arts, humanities, social science, have suffered in recent years at the expense of STEM subjects.
Yes. And
at the expense of kind of vocational degrees. And I'd really like to see that kind of rebalance there, because the skills that you gain through studying humanities, social science, arts degrees are absolutely invaluable, and they are highly valued by employers. The kind of communication skills, problem solving, critical thinking, all of that, really, really important.
You were saying about how the past and what we've done, it relates to how we
view the world, how we understand cultures and societies. Absolutely, and especially. When we started this degree, we have a second year module that looks at the Ulster crisis, and that first ran in 2016. And at the beginning of the year, it kind of when we were kind of putting this together, we were kind of thinking, the Ulster crisis. We think it's important. We think it's relevant. Why? How did the island of Ireland become partitioned, and why is the situation the way it is? But of course, by the end of 2016, with the Brexit referendum and everything that's happened since, it has become absolutely vital to have that understanding of the Northern Irish border and why the situation is the way it is.
Yeah.
And to, through studying that, to develop those critical thinking skills whereby you can take any piece of information and challenge it and say, what am I being told? Why am I being told this? And where's the evidence? And are there any hidden agendas and assumptions there?
And there always are.
And to be able to do that with yourself as well, to say, what are my hidden assumptions that are impacting the way in which I view this, and I think we do that very much through our heritage modules as well. I have a second year heritage module that looks at some of the big questions in the heritage sector today. It looks at the politicisation of heritage, the destruction of heritage through terrorism. It looks at the role of statues in the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that. And it's challenging. There are lots of questions that we as society are dealing with, and there aren't any easy answers.
No.
So, we need to challenge ourselves as well as other people about, what do we think, why do we think it, and therefore what do we think needs to happen.
Sounds like education is part of the solution.
It very much
is. A large part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for telling us about all of that. If it's okay, I'd like to just move on to another part of. You said about what's important and how history has led us to think from where we've come to where we are. I find that in my job as a financial planner, nothing more fascinating than our history with money. Mm-hmm. Our earliest memories with money. So what were your earliest memories of money? You've mentioned that your parents were both professionals, and
they were. Yeah. So I've been in a very lucky position of not having to worry too much about money throughout my life. When my brother and I were born, my grandfather, my mum's father, and his wife, they started a savings account for us. And so by the time I was kind of 21, there was a reasonable amount of money in there, and that really helped me throughout my postgraduate studies. I don't think I would have been able to do the field work that I did in the Isle of Lewis without having had that. So I kind of have a very strong appreciation of that. And my grandfather was Polish. He was from Gdansk.
Gosh.
And the story is that he bought his way out of Poland after the war with jewellery. And he came over. He met my grandmother during the war. Yeah. She was a nurse, and he was in the Polish Air Force. And he came over here after the war to marry her. And they sort of lived their lives in a sense where if they went somewhere, they would buy jewellery. And so their kind of financial security was partly in jewellery.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been passed on to my mother and to me to an extent, and that there are different types of security.
Okay, well, so of all the things you've done throughout your life so far, what's given you the most fulfilment from a professional perspective?
I think initially probably learning Scottish Gaelic and sort of immersing myself in that culture. That's quite an achievement. It's funny because I came to the Isle of Man, and Manx Gaelic is very much, it's related language.
Yes.
And I thought, I can pick that up in no time. And I'd sort of forgotten by then how difficult it was to learn another language and how much time it took. And I'm ashamed to say I haven't put the time into learning Manx to the extent that I wish I had.
Sounds like it wouldn't be too much of a stretch, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, you would think.
Yeah.
So I think that definitely. And
there are tales I've heard of when growing up of fishermen who used to trade insults in Gaelic.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, yes. they understood.
And then I think probably from a professional perspective now, seeing my students succeed is really rewarding.
Yeah,
really, really rewarding.
Yes, you've done a good bit of that.
Yeah, we've seen a few students coming through the years, yeah.
It's funny, you can see the centre of some people's story, and it seems to be Gaelic language. It seems to be from there, everything
kind of emerged from that, yeah. From I remember when I was 12, 13, we had a library down the road, and there was a book in the library called Gaelic Without Groans. It was kind of a learning guide. And I didn't find out until years later that it's actually a terrible, terrible textbook. It's not very good at all. But I used to take myself down to the library and kind of sit there and pore over this book and write notes to myself and kind of start learning on my own. And to kind of get from there to... I remember when I first went to Solmarostig, the Gaelic College in Skye, I said, my aim for the end of the first year is to be able to listen to Gaelic language radio and understand it. And I could, and I did that, and I feel quite proud of having done that.
You should be.
Yeah,
superb. So for any existing business owner, entrepreneur, organisational leader in whatever subject they're doing, what would be your number one tip?
Make your own opportunities. Put yourself out there, take responsibility, decide where you want to get to, and make steps to get there. I think it's probably, and I tell my students that as well, take responsibility for A, for your learning, but B, for whatever you want to go on and do. Decide what skills you need to get and how you're going to get them. One of the most important things I ever did was I taught myself how to touch type while I was in Skye. There's a computer room, and it had a program on it. I thought, I could do this. And it's just served me so well. And I think just take responsibility and put yourself out there and push yourself out of your comfort zone. It will feel awful, but you'll really feel the benefit from it at the end of the day, I think. And prepare hard. Preparation is everything.
That's a really great tip. Yeah, thank you. So what do you do about, to relax, Catriona? Keep your life in balance. We talked when we first met. You said about you've got a gym and weights. You used to lift weights, and you've got to get back into that. So I'm just wondering what you do to relax at the moment.
I used to lift weights.
And when you're going to make a step plan to get back to
exactly, a very good point. I used to. I enjoy reading a lot, mainly fiction, sort of. Detective thriller fiction, fantasy fiction. So escapism, I guess, something to escape. And podcasts. I love podcasts. So this is my first ever podcast. So I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm really pleased you're here.
Yeah. So I listened to a lot of politics podcasts and true crime podcasts. And I think when I was very young, I wanted to be a detective. And there's a part of me that still wants to be a detective. And I think, my job in sort of the research element of my job, certainly it is being a detective, and being a historian is kind of being a detective. And I think, listening to those kinds of podcasts, I can kind of get into the nitty gritty and investigate things without it having an impact on my life or my career too much. So that's kind of enjoyment for me.
Yes. Well. So we can list what are your favourite podcasts? So
I think for politics, there's quite a few. The Newsagents, Newscast. What else have I been listening to recently? Some of the American politics podcasts as well. CNN's very good for American politics.
Yeah. It's interesting to have views. I love the Rest is Politics.
Rest is Politics is fantastic. I love
that, yeah.
Really, really good.
Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell.
Yeah, fantastic. And I tell you what I love about it is getting to hear really good political journalists and politicians talking casually and really telling you what they think, not just putting on a face for the 10 o'clock news or whatever,
or hiding behind a soundbite on a headline, an inflammatory headline.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's great. And in terms of true crime, I think Crime Junkie is probably my favourite.
Oh, right, great.
Again, you kind of get an insight into the way cases are solved, and
well, we'll come back to that. Well, you tell me some books and things there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So what do you think about the best things are living in the Isle of Man? What's the best?
Oh, I think it has to be the natural environment and being so close to the natural environment. And I lived for 2 years in the Isle of Skye, and the Isle of Skye is probably about 3 times bigger than the Isle of Man in terms of land mass, but it has a population of about 10,000. And when I first came over here, and I knew that the Isle of Man was small but had a population of about 85,000, I thought, it's going to feel really, really crowded. And it just doesn't. and you have these, population centres that are busy but not overcrowded, and within 5 minutes you're in the countryside.
Yeah, it is nice, isn't it?
And that for me is fantastic. And it just has a really strong sense of its own history and culture and identity as well. Although I can kind of see the identity element diminishing a little bit through my students. The younger students coming through don't have as strong a Manx identity, I don't think.
No, well, that's inevitable from the mass sort of migration
and globalisation as well. Yeah. So I think those things, and just I remember when I first came over, I couldn't kind of believe how many things were happening on the island, especially my interest in kind of heritage and traditional culture and things like that. And there's so much going on, and I've been really lucky to have been involved with Manx National Heritage and Culture of Annan over the last 10 years, and sort of seeing the fantastic work that they do, and the way in which they've kind of encourage and engender interest on the island in our history and culture, has been really inspiring, actually, enlightening. I think that the island really has a lot to offer.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. But what about challenges? What's our main challenges?
Well, I guess we have a lot, but so do most places at the moment. I guess sitting here right now, the one that probably has impacted me more recently is just travel. Getting on and off the island in a reliable way, an affordable way, and with the government wanting to increase migration to the Isle of Man, you've got to have reliable ways to get on and off the island. I mean, despite the sort of economic problems and the problems with health and social care, that's a kind of basic as well, I think. So, just dealing with the changing demographics. Yeah.
So, any solutions to that? Do you think getting another airline or two to come? Or
I don't know, to be honest. I kind of feel that. I think a lot of people who will sort of comment on social media about do this, do that, do the next thing, don't necessarily have the understanding of how it works, and so I'm kind of reluctant, not being in government, to comment.
I thought you could say everything in 144 characters.
You would think, Well. But again, I think it's very difficult without kind of having the broader context to know exactly what can be done. From an educational perspective, I can certainly see some things that I would like to change. I've mentioned the kind of the devaluation of sort of humanities and things like that. But also, I think we need a good post-16 education strategy on the island, and I don't think we have one. We don't have a sort of joined-up approach that sort of doesn't pit the schools against UCM for 16 to 18-year-old education.
It seems to do that at the moment.
It really does. Yeah. And I think it's the government has kind of said that it wants to develop higher education on the island to give students that option of studying on island, but it needs properly funding, and it's not being funded at the moment. Okay. So I think there are things that we could do, and not everybody who wants to get a degree wants to have to leave home to do it. I was very lucky living in Glasgow, near Glasgow, that I had a choice of universities that I could have gone to without having to leave home. And I did. I wasn't, I left school at 17. I could have left at 16. I was not ready to leave home at that point in time. So I think, to give kids that option, I think we maybe need to think a little bit more outside the box about how we can do that, how we can partner with UK institutions to offer our students more without having to leave the island.
Yeah, maybe more apprenticeships linked to that.
Apprenticeships, distance learning. There are models out there,
definitely,
that would enable us to kind of.
So how can we move that to more of a discussion between you and I today? Is there a way? Is there a pathway to talk to the right people and make it happen?
Good question. I don't know. Government's quite hierarchical, I find. It's very difficult to... And actually, the institutions that are part of government can be quite hierarchical as well. It's very difficult necessarily to get your voice heard by the right people. At one level, it's very easy because you could be sitting next to your local MHK in the pub, and at another level, going through the channels of the civil service can be quite challenging, I think.
So anybody who's listening to this who wants to take it further could perhaps
come and
reach
have a
out.
chat. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd love that.
Well, your contact details will be in the show notes, so let's hope. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So what have you got planned next, Catriona? What's next on the agenda for changing the world?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I'd still like to be part of sort of developing higher education at UCM, but it kind of depends on the way the wind blows, really. Yeah. But I'm there. I'm ready. I'm willing to do that. I'm very keen to kind of move forward with the Women in Manx Politics project. We should be getting some publications ready later this year. Doing some more. I'm actually giving a lecture tomorrow at the UCM Research Festival on some of our latest work, so quite looking forward to that. Yeah,
this will be going out after that, but we'll look forward to hearing how you get on in that.
But generally, actually kind of what you mentioned earlier is kind of, I don't have a very good work-life balance. I never have. I am a chronic worrier, and so I think personally trying to take a step back a little bit. I've been through the menopause, which has had a massive impact on me, not in a very positive way. So I kind of, it's made me reevaluate a little bit where my priorities are and what I want to kind of, where I need to put my focus, shall we say.
Nope, you're in good company here. We're all about that here.
So I think that's going to be my focus for the time moving forward, as much as what I want to do academically, really.
Yeah. Okay. And right, so those books then that you're using to relax. What books have you been reading?
I've been reading all sorts. I'm knee deep in Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club series right now.
I love that. It's so
fantastic.
My favourite. I can't wait for the next book to come out. Yeah. It's due, isn't it? Very soon.
It's just come out.
Has it?
I actually been way through it. Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah. It's very rare that I will kind of buy a book at full price, but that one I did. Yeah. Very good. But I think generally the books that I kind of tend to go back to are probably Terry Pratchett. A very young boyfriend introduced me to Terry Pratchett, and I think he's just got such a astute observations on the world around us that I miss that.
Yeah, that's a Discworld series.
Discworld series. Yeah. I think we kind of need that sort of that astute commentary on the world. Yeah. So I miss that. And I think the other sort of influential book I read maybe about 10 years ago, and it was Quiet by Susan Cain, about the power of introverts. And that was a big eye-opener for me, because I had not recognised that in myself. Okay. And I always kind of thought I was quiet, I was shy, I was lacking socially, and that kind of thing. And
you can lecture.
Yes, I know. Nobody's more surprised than me. So I think, that really kind of helped me to understand the kind of the way I am, the way I approach things, and also generally what I need to thrive, and to accept that and say, actually, it's okay if I don't want to go out on a night in cuddling my dog on the sofa. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. So
lovely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So who inspires you?
Again, I wouldn't say there's any one person that inspires me, because I think we're all, nobody's perfect. Yeah. But I would say people generally, anybody who's kind of overcome any form of adversity, who goes on to thrive in whatever way that is for them, and to lead a fulfilling life, and to make positive change and stand up for positive change, then that's the kind of thing that inspires me. Yeah.
Well said. Favourite quotes? Got any favourite quotes?
I do, yeah. The one that kind of surprised even me. So this is a quote that I chose for my end of school yearbook. It surprised everybody as well as me, and it's it's actually a lyric from a Welsh rock group called The Alarm. And they had an album that came out in 1984 called Declaration, and it's from one of their songs, Blaze of Glory, and it says, there's nothing you shouldn't speak of. If you've got something to say, there's no one to be scared of, just get them out of the way. And at that time, I was an incredibly shy, quiet girl with a kind of somebody in there bursting to get out, but not knowing quite how. And that quote really spoke to me, and it has taken me years and years and years to become that person that is willing to speak out. And I still go back to that quote when I think about that.
Amazing. Inspirational. Thank you.
Okay.
And for our listeners to go to find out more about you and the work you're doing, where can they go?
Google my name. I think it's probably the best thing to do, and hope nothing nasty comes up. I've got a page on the UCM website somewhere.
Okay,
if you can find that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll put those in the show notes here on LinkedIn or
LinkedIn,
any of the socials.
Twitter.
Yeah. Wonderful.
You can find me there.
Well, that about wraps us up here for today. But so thank you so much for coming in today, Catriona, and sharing your story.
Thank you for speaking to me.
Oh, thank you.
It's been great.
Thanks for listening this far. I hope you found this episode to be valuable. If so, I'd like to ask you for a small favour. Would you please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review, because that's one of the best ways for others to find the series, and please send a link to the podcast to 3 friends or colleagues who know they'll find it helpful. That way we can spread the word about how great a place the Isle of Man is to live and work, and help spread some positivity. Thanks again for tuning in and being part of our great community. I'll see you next time. Island Influencers is a fortnightly podcast. Make sure you don't miss the next episode by clicking the follow button on your podcast platform. A big thanks to the producer Catherine Watts from Social Cues and editor Martin Bamford at Bear Content, and thank you for listening.